Welcome to Blockchain Ethics. My name is Reese Lundmark, and I work for the Digital Currency Initiative, and this is...
Hi, everyone. My name is Neha Narula, and I lead the Digital Currency Initiative.
Yeah, and that's Ocean, do you want to say?
Hi, I'm Ocean. I am helping TA Blockchain Ethics this semester.
Yeah. And so we are, today, the goal is to chat about introductions, to give a little overview of the course, give some expectations, chat a little bit about ethics as well, and then kind of give a history of crypto anarchy, which is kind of the initial piece before cryptocurrency. It's kind of like the nesting ground before cryptocurrency became a thing. There was this community of people. So that's what we're going to chat about today. And as I said before with the introductions, giving a little bit more of a background for who we are. So, as I said before, I'm this one. My name is Reese. I work for the Digital Currency Initiative with Neha. Neha is my boss. I am Ocean's boss, kind of. And I'm from Denver, Colorado. I've worked for the DCI, the Digital Currency Initiative, for about a year at this point. And I'm definitely very passionate about ethics and tech ethics more generally, and my title is technically Head of Community and Long-Term Societal Impact. So this is aligned with those things. Is there anything else cool to say about me? I am really into not making music, but listening to music, which we can talk more about later.
Yeah, sure. Just one more thing I'm going to share about Reese. If you haven't Googled him already, you should, and read some of his blog posts about long-term social impact. In particular, I think he has a really inspiring post about being very forthright with his financials, which is something that we are going to talk about in this course, but also giving and how to think about giving and donating. So I think it's a really inspiring post, so I urge you to check that out if you haven't seen it already. So my name is Neha Narula. I lead the Digital Currency Initiative based here out of the MIT Media Lab. For those who don't know about it, I'll just give a quick overview. It was started in 2015, kind of out of the demise of what was then the Bitcoin Foundation, which still exists, but in a very different form. There were these developers who were working on the open source protocol for Bitcoin who were didn't have a job for a period of time, weren't getting paid any longer. They were paid through the foundation, and so the DCI was formed, and we're now currently about 10 people. We work on research, open source protocol development, and education, teaching classes like this. Last year, Taj Dryja and myself, another person at the DCI, taught a class called Cryptocurrency Engineering and Design. So if you're interested in sort of getting your hands dirty with that, it's on OCW right now, OpenCourseWare, MIT OpenCourseWare, so you can check that out if you'd like. And if there's enough interest, we might consider teaching that again next spring. Unfortunately, this class conflicts with another great class I taught out of Sloan by Gary Gensler called Blockchain and Money. I'm sorry about that. I think that class is also going up on OCW, though I'm grateful that you're all here. I think this will be a pretty different class than that one. We're going to be talking a lot more about the affordances of the technology and how to think about designing it and what the technology enables and doesn't enable. So I will leave it at that. Yeah.
And one fun thing actually to say, Neha, is that, so myself, I was a computer science major in college, but have not coded for, at this point in time, almost like 3 years probably. And Neha has a PhD in distributed systems and still codes to some extent, and has done lots of cool research, and so knows a lot about the technical aspects of the technology. Just wanted to state that as well.
Hi, so I am, my name is Ocean Boulet. I'm an assistant. I'm gonna fix that on the website. So I am a first year here at the Media Lab. I would have not known about the Media Lab in general. I would have never become a grad student here had Neha not put on this cryptocurrency bootcamp, or the DCI as a whole, but that was an initiative that was put together by the DCI 3 years ago. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I was lucky enough to kind of like make it with like this other cohort of like 25 kids, and we were like setting up like 21 computing like Bitcoin mining machines that are now like antiques that you would collect, like Beanie Babies. That's great. So I kind of got initial start with the DCI, and I've never really fully left. I am in responsive environments. That's my kind of official home on paper, and I work at kind of the intersections of like decentralized networking and sustainability initiatives for like ocean ecosystems. But I am very passionate about this work, and super stoked to be part of this class. This is like the first time this class has ever been offered. So we're so happy to have you guys. And if you have any questions whatsoever, I'm here. And yeah, to get you guys plugged into the community in general after this initial class.
Perfect. With that, I want to understand a little bit more of who is in the room. And so just like raise your hand if you answer yes to these questions. So who here is a student? Okay, sweet. Who here is not a student? Okay, sweet. Who is undergrad? Sweet. And then who's a graduate student? Should be all the other non-students. And who is a major in computer science? About half. And who's not a major in computer science? Okay, sweet. And then who here, who owns cryptocurrency already? Okay, some folks. And who doesn't own any cryptocurrency? Okay, nice. For reference, both Neha and I, and generally the Digital Currency Initiative, own a de minimis amount of cryptocurrency. So we try to be very neutral if possible. And who has, just coming into this class, who spent like more than 10 hours reading about like blockchain technology? Okay, so something. Who spent more than like 25 hours reading about blockchain technology? Okay, so some folks who definitely are already excited. That's good. Okay, so it seems like we have mostly students, I'd say mostly grad students, about half computer science, half non-computer science, and a variety of ranges for how deep people have gone with cryptocurrency, from none at all to spend more than 25 hours reading about it. I think that's kind of one of our goals with this class, is to bring in people with different experience levels and different skill sets around this technology so we can have some of these ethical questions. So I want to also allow people to kind of understand a little bit more about who is in this room. So we're just going to do a little bit of discussion with your partner. The way this is going to work is you're just going to find someone next to you. You're going to say, hey, this is my name. I'm a student here, or I work here, or whatever, and kind of maybe your hope or your interest in this class. Does that make sense? So you're going to spend 30 seconds one way, and then we're going to do 30 seconds the other way. Okay, find a partner, talk to them. Cool. So hope you understood a little bit more about who's here and why they're interested in this class. And so now I want to give an overview on kind of what the class looks like and some of our expectations for it. So we're going to talk about these 5 things, mostly thinking about what is a blockchain, and we're going to go more deeply into this next week with Neha leading kind of the technical piece there. But what is a blockchain, and what is blockchain ethics, and why would you want to take this course? So the first note, though, is that you are more important than blockchain ethics. This is true for all of you. It's true for the instructors, that your emotional, mental, spiritual, and physical health is more important than blockchain ethics. We really believe this. I mean, this is us saying, if you're feeling stressed and if things are intense in your life or whatever, let us know. And it can be okay. You can like not do your homework that week, or don't do that every week. But seriously, though, I mean, we really care about you as a person and your holistic development. That's the other piece here, is that there's your kind of intellectual development within this class, and obviously all the cool things we're going to learn. And there's like you as a person, and your personal life, and your professional life, your holistic kind of you as a being. So we care about that as well, and that you as a person, we care about that more than all the interesting, cool computer things that we're going to be checking out. So we just wanted to state that up front as a key mindset that we have here. With that said, let's talk about blockchain stuff. So, and again, as I said before, Neha in our next class, which is really our technical affordances class, and by affordances we mean the things that the technology can do. That's what often like tech ethicists say for that. We're going to chat about that in depth next week, but we just want to give an overview of what is a blockchain, kind of get your mind around it. So the weird thing is that this term really only started to come about after 2008, which is when this anonymous person on the internet, Satoshi Nakamoto, posted this white paper about Bitcoin. It was like, hey, here's this new kind of peer-to-peer electronic cash system that I'm going to post on the internet. And then early 2009, he posted the code, he or she or it or whatever that thing was, posted the code, and it started going. And it was this weird new kind of money that people hadn't really seen before, that wasn't nation-state money. And the first really big moment with it was in 2010 when someone offered on the internet, they said, hey, I will give some of this fake magic internet money to someone for a pizza. And they said, sweet, let's do it. Someone on Reddit agreed. It was $10,000 or 10,000 Bitcoin for this pizza, which was at the time like $40 and now is $106 million. So it was expensive. And so that was when it was like, oh, this magic internet money can actually be used to buy real things. And then from there, we've had a bunch of crazier things happen later with the Silk Road. And this is a graph like the market cap, which it means like how much total Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies are in the world over time. So it's like, 2 years ago, it was almost $1 trillion worth of these magic internet monies. And so we're at the beginning of understanding this thing. And that means, I like this analogy here of, there's this kind of like an ancient proverb about touching the elephant, which means that depending on where you're touching the elephant, it can look like different things. If you're touching, the trunk, it feels like a snake. If you're touching the tusks, it feels like a spear. And so we're really at that phase right now with blockchain and cryptocurrency technology. It's very difficult to understand what it is, and you really have to apply these kind of different lenses to know, like, oh, how do economists think about it? How do computer scientists think about it? And as a note on that, and we'll talk about this more next week, but there's a bunch of these different groups that believe different things about the technology and what it's meant for and what it can do and things like that. So when we say blockchain, so this is to say it's confusing, but really when you come around, what is a blockchain? It's a chain of blocks. That's weird to say, but it's true. I like to think about it as kind of like a toilet paper roll, where each of these is a block, and each of those toilet paper rolls is just a chain of them, and each of them has on it just this list of like transactions. So it's like I give Neha some money, Neha gives us Ian some money, and we kind of are giving each other money, and that's what these transactions look like, and a bunch of them get bucketed into one block, and then a bunch of those blocks together is the blockchain. So that's what people talk about when they mean blockchain. It's just kind of this database, essentially, this very long database that's broken down, like the toilet paper roll, into these blocks. So that blockchain, though, the weird thing about it is that by having this chain of blocks, and then knowing what that chain of blocks is and trusting that you know what that chain of blocks is it's this new kind of digital technology, and we'll talk more about what that means, but it's also this new weird kind of money, and that it is, you can pay for it with, or you can pay for things with it, and it's a new kind of what people call like an institution, which is a way to motivate and coordinate people. So it's something like a religion or a nation state, or recently with the Web 2.0 internet world, things like Facebook and Amazon and Google are showing us these new kind of institutions, these new big platforms. Something like Facebook has 2 billion monthly active users. So you can kind of view the blockchain as technology, as money, or as kind of a new kind of institution. So that institution is based on this weird new kind of trust. And as a note here, this is something that's weird with cryptocurrency and blockchain technology in general, is that when we're dealing with the technology itself, when we change how money works, that's something that's very, I think, complicated and confusing, which is like we've had the same money for a long time, and now there's this new kind of money, and like money is this really core primitive for society. So like, what does that mean? I think trust is a similar thing, where it's like trust is kind of a core primitive in society for how societies operate. And so thinking about these new kinds of trust can be kind of strange. But you can think about it as blockchain is part of this evolution of trust that we're going through, which is way back in the day, in hunter-gatherer times or whatever, we had kind of local trust, where you trusted the folks in your community. And then more recently, in the era of nation states and religions and things like that, we had institutional trust, where you can go through the institution, or something like a bank, where it's, if I'm paying Neha through Wells Fargo or whatever, I trust that the bank has a nice ledger or whatever, and I can send her my money through that. So we went into this land of institutional trust, and now we're in this new land of distributed trust. And this is true for something like blockchain that we'll talk about in a second, but it's also true if you think about like Uber and Airbnb and sharing economy things, they're based off this new kind of distributed trust where you say, okay, I kind of trust the platform and people have given people ratings and all this kind of thing, such that I'm just gonna go into this stranger's home. And so there's no like institution necessarily that's governing that trust, but it's this new weird kind of distributed trust. And blockchain is part of this new kind of distributed trust because that ledger that everybody has, I think it makes sense to look at this for a second, that new ledger that everybody has, traditionally speaking, it would go through this big centralized, like a centralized third party essentially, and that centralized third party was the one that would say, cool, I say that Reese has $100 and Neha has $200, and that's the situation. But now with these new distributed ledgers like blockchain, everybody has a copy of the ledger, and maybe we'll talk about this next time, because of these weird miners, these like servers, solving these hard problems, that gives you trust that the ledger, the distributed ledger, is true. So this is to say that one way to think about this new blockchain thing is it's this new kind of trust, and that new kind of distributed trust, and that new kind of distributed trust allows you to do technological things. So this is, you can think of it as a new part of the internet protocol. Again, this is, or the new like internet stack. This again is kind of a weird thing like money and trust, where it's like, we don't really think about the internet stack very often, but the internet has had a huge impact on our lives, and it was like built over time, and these like random things like TCP/IP, where you were saying, hey, who do I send my information to, and things like that. And all of those were kind of information based, and now we're going to this new kind of, a new part of the stack that instead of sending information, you're sending value to other people on the internet. So you could think about it like that from a tech perspective. You could think about it like this from a tech perspective, where it's this new kind of database or ledger. We've had a variety of different ledgers over time, and most recently some of these centralized digital ledgers that are now turning into this kind of distributed ledger. So that's from the tech perspective. You think of it from the money perspective, yeah, it's this weird new kind of money where over time, that is funny. I stole this from someone else. Same with the other one too. So it's a new kind of money over time. We've had people have used different kinds of money over time, and the stuff that we're most aware of is things like credit cards or paper money, and we've switched over to electronic money with things like PayPal, and then cryptocurrency is this new kind of money that's based around this new kind of trust. Or you can think of it, as I said before, this weird new kind of institution where you've had, whether you have nation states as an institution, or religions as an institution, or all these companies, or something like Google, Amazon, Facebook, and Apple, these new kinds of internet platforms, these things that can motivate and coordinate people to do things. We'll see it more about how exactly blockchain does that, but because this kind of trust, it can allow people to motivate and coordinate. Yeah.
How is cryptocurrency different from just online money, like in the previous slide?
Yeah, that's a good question. So his question is, how is cryptocurrency different than electronic money? And my main answer here, and Neha, you can correct me if I'm wrong, is that electronic money is essentially built on the existing banking and financial system, where you have this centralized ledger, where you say, okay, technically I'm using Venmo, which is some new kind of digital money, but in fact, what's happening is I'm sending Neha money on Venmo. That eventually gets propagated up to Wells Fargo and then central banks, and then that goes on some big old ledger, and it says, okay, we're switching it from Reese used to own $10, now he owns $0, and Neha used to own 0, now she owns 10. While cryptocurrency is based off of this distributed ledger. So I'd say that's the crucial difference. And I'd say the other crucial difference is that this new kind of currency is it's programmable in a different way. And what that means is that, so if you think about, and we'll chat about this more later, but when you are creating these new internet protocols, you're creating like these rule sets for how people either give and exchange information or how they give and receive value. And with these new cryptocurrency as a money, you can kind of inject it with programmable things like if-then statements, like if something happens, then send the money, and things like that. So that's my first initial answer. Does that help?
Yeah.
That sounds cool. So it's these new things, and it's crazy. So to conclude, this is saying, what is the blockchain? We're at the very beginning of understanding it. It is, in the end, the blockchain is this chain of blocks in this distributed way that is built on this weird kind of trust that allows everybody to trust these distributed ledgers. And that weird new kind of trust in that new ledger enables, you can think of it from a technological perspective, from a money perspective, or from kind of an institutional perspective. And again, we'll go deeper on the actual technical affordances next class for how exactly it operates. But I think that's crucial to say, what is a blockchain? Because if you think about what is blockchain ethics, really it's just, it's a field and it's a community of people who are trying to, answer the question, how can we positively shape the development of blockchain technology? So it's really just what you expect, people trying to make this thing happen for good. Think about it like whenever there's a new technology, or for many new technologies that are impactful enough, then you're going to have like the tech ethics part of it. So when nuclear bombs started to come out, those were very powerful, and so we started to get nuclear security and nuclear proliferation agreements and things like that. Same with AI, there's now whole fields of AI ethics and centers around the world. Biotech, you obviously have biotech ethics, and so if you got blockchain, we're going to have blockchain ethics as long as it has a big enough impact on society. And this is
Oh, you finish yours.
I was just going to say, this is especially true because this is true for any technology, but it's especially true for blockchain because not in addition to blockchain being this weird new technology, maybe a new layer of the internet stack, it's also money. It's connected to money, and it's connected to these new kinds of institutions. So it's kind of especially impactful.
Yeah, just to sort of forward reference some of the stuff that we're going to be talking about, and again, why we think this is a topic that's worth time and energy and investment. I think as Reese is saying, when new technology develops, there's a lot of conversation about how to use it ethically and what kinds of procedures and questions we want to put into place. What do we want to think about? And something that we've noticed at the DCI is people aren't necessarily having this conversation around cryptocurrency and blockchain technology yet. There's a little bit of it out there, but it's not really structured, and we think that it's important to raise these questions early for a multitude of reasons. So one reason is because this stuff is money, and for the first time, we're kind of seeing a way of combining software with money that hasn't really happened before. People can invent their own tokens out of nowhere. They can issue them, they can distribute them, they can, and we're seeing pushback through a lot of regulatory environments on whether or not it's okay to do this and under what circumstances it is okay to do this. What kind of information do you need to share about who you are and what you're building in order to do this in a way that complies with law? But in addition to the fact that we are sort of building these new forms of money, we're also building something that is often termed censorship resistant. So you asked kind of what is the major difference between electronic money, versus cryptocurrencies and blockchain technology. A big thing that cryptocurrencies are trying, like Bitcoin, are trying to do is they're trying to be censorship resistant in the sense that they're designed so that it's very difficult for a third party to block a transaction from going through. So it's really very difficult, and the developers of Bitcoin are working very hard to try to make it almost impossible for any entity to stop a transfer of Bitcoin, to stop a payment. Now, if you think about the way that our existing financial system is designed, it's not designed in this way at all. Cash payments are peer-to-peer, are truly peer-to-peer. It's difficult to stop those from going through, but they're very analog. You have to, we don't normally mail massive amounts of cash around. It's not really a safe thing to do. It's very difficult to move large amounts of physical currency. In the digital world, banks, the government agencies, endpoint lenders, they have the ability to stop payment. PayPal can stop you from receiving money through PayPal. Venmo can block your transactions. My bank can seize my funds. This is a core part of how governments enact certain types of policy. And we're in the process of building a system, a parallel system, which is trying to make this impossible. And that's why you hear about things like ransomware happening with Bitcoin. You hear about dark markets. You hear about using cryptocurrencies to buy drugs. And I think it's really worth sort of getting into some of this and talking about this. What kind of system are we building? What are we enabling? Is it okay to enable these things or not? How should we be thinking about how to design these systems so that we can still enact public policy that we have as a society has decided is important? And so those are some of the questions we're going to be wrestling with and engaging with in this class very directly. How do we think about this technology, and how do we think about a new way of enacting these social goals?
100% agree. I mean, yeah, thank you for that, Mayo. There's a lot of spicy topics. There's assassination mark, it's crazy.
Yeah.
And this is what Neha was getting at, which is why take this course? I mean, I think that, and Neha was hitting on some of these things, but the first piece is this kind of impact and meaning piece that Neha was getting at, which is this technology, internally kind of think about like, hey, if blockchain technology has even 10% of the internet's impact, or 5%, or even 1%, like we should proactively take great care in developing it. And as a side note, along with that, this is, this catalyzing a movement piece is interesting in what Neha was getting at as well, which is that this AI ethics, there are all kinds of AI, it's a mature ecosystem at this point in time. 10 years ago, there was very few of these things existed. And now you have tens of millions or hundreds of millions of dollars of annual funding going to hundreds of centers around the world around AI ethics, which is great. We are excited by that. That's great that that civil society is getting engaged there. But this doesn't exist at all for blockchain ethics. This is, as far as Neha and I know, the first ever blockchain ethics class. There are no centers for blockchain ethics. There are no there's no funding going to it. I mean, this is at the start. So this is kind of a reason to take this class, is that you're at the beginning of a cool kind of movement and starting the start of a new ecosystem that we honestly expect, whether or not we are doing this class, we expect in 10 years the blockchain ethics ecosystem will look something like this, 10 or 15 years. So that's another reason to take it. And then the third reason is just this intellectual curiosity and challenge. I mean, blockchain is very complicated, and blockchain ethics is even more complicated to understand how this stuff impacts society and what kind of public and social goals we want to, what affordances it gives and how we want to kind of shape those positively. It's very complicated. So being part of this class is super intellectually challenging and stimulating. So let me say one final thing here, or actually two final things, which is as for the expectations of this class, so we really kind of see this as a set of learning feedback loops, which is really just to say that we will be, Neha and I know a good amount about this technology. We've been thinking about this course and things of this variety for a while, and we're essentially going to be working with you to say, hey, here's where we're at. You guys will say, hey, here's where we're at, and we're just going to keep on going back and forth with that essentially for 13 weeks. And all of the things that we do, whether it's the lectures or the readings or the assignments or the grades, all of those are really vectoring towards and pushing towards this goal of just optimizing for your learning. So and it's not like we want to grade because we want to give you good or bad grades. We want to grade because we want everybody to learn as well as possible. Let's say this. There's another piece of this which is which we were chatting about before the class as well, which is that this class, it's not, if we were doing a class like the cryptocurrency engineering class, just building technical things, it's kind of less intense. But we're chatting about some of these things, it's going to be some of these ethical issues, these societal issues, it'll be more intense. And we just wanted to remind everybody that everybody in this class has a very different perspective to bring. And the main thing that we want from folks is kind of this two-part system here, which is really speaking frankly and vulnerably. So when you have the floor to say, hey, here's what I think, this is kind of weird, but I'm not sure about this, here are my thoughts, and here's what my honest opinion is. And when you're not speaking, to really listen to people curiously and empathetically, and to try to understand where they're coming from. So there are a lot of kind of sub pieces here. that are maybe similar to other things that you all have had in classes. It's it's listening respectively. Don't interrupt people. It's kind of listening actively, not like forming your arguments. Trying to committing to learning, not debating. It's not like, oh, I want Bitcoin to be though. It's like, no, we're in a debate mode, or we're not in a debate mode here. To criticize the idea, not the individual. Everybody, no one wants to be personally attacked in here. Avoid blaming people. Super inflammatory language. Making sure you're giving everyone the chance to speak. This one I think is actually pretty crucial, and is something that I think about a lot, which is I have a podcast, and so whenever I'm on the podcast, I think what percentage of the time am I speaking and what percentage of the time is the guest speaking. And so you all in the class can think, okay, if there are 20 of us, then I should be speaking about 5% of the time or whatever when we're having kind of bigger discussions. And then, avoid assuming things about people, where they're from, where they're coming from, etc. And just as a note here, we'll share this more over the internet soon, but we will hold people accountable to these, which is if we see people, these are values that we want to have in the class, and if we see people going away from these values, then we'll speak up and we'll say, hey, this is not what we're looking for here. And if it gets really bad, which I don't expect it to, then we would say, hey, we don't think you're a contributing member to this class right now. I don't expect it to happen, but we really do want people to have this to be a safe space, but also a space where people can be frank about what they think. So, at a high level, what the class looks like and what these learning feedback loops look like is this image. And so the way this looks is on the far left you have the class numbers. There are 13 total classes. It's Thursdays from 3 to 5 p.m. These are the dates that happen. There's no class on Thanksgiving. And it's kind of broken into 3 big sections for content. So there's section 1 is this overview of blockchain ethics. And so we are here, this is today. And next class, we're going to chat about the affordances of the technology, how the technology actually works. We're going to chat about those 3 big buckets that we were talking about earlier today, about what about the tech ethics side, what about the money ethics side, what about the institutional ethics side. And then we're going to go into section 2, which is this weird idea of seeing like a blockchain protocol. And what that kind of means is thinking from the perspective of these new blockchain systems as this new kind of institution, and how are these things, how are they governed? How should we govern these kinds of these new systems that are open source? They're out there for the world. It's that's a note here, is that all of these blockchain platforms are just open source software that lives on the internet and anybody can access them. And so, how are they governed? How do people fund things with them? So this is something that Neha and I have a lot of connection to, which is, we hire some of these Bitcoin core developers, and there's no way for them to make traditional money. They don't work at a company, they work for internet infrastructure kind of. And so thinking about how to fund these public goods and then how that's connected to wealth inequality as well. And these systems have pretty bad wealth inequality, so kind of diving in and looking at that. And that's where we'll discuss a little bit of this billionaire philanthropy piece and how that operates in the cryptocurrency world. And then the final piece of seeing a blockchain protocol is that once you get into this world, there are a lot of people who think about how these systems work. And when you're designing these systems, it's very difficult, and you have to think kind of from this like an attacker perspective all the time, where you're super paranoid, and you could with something like Bitcoin, it's who could attack this? The code is open source, anybody can do anything they want to it. And so when you get in this mindset, this kind of paranoid incentives mindset, that's called mechanism design, where you're kind of thinking about how these mechanisms work and how they align with each other. And that mindset is an important mindset to understand, especially as people start to apply it to other parts of life. So we'll kind of look at how people are applying mechanism design in other ways. So that is section 2, and then section 3 is it's a little bit more flexible. We might change these over time, but I think in general it's looking at internet ethics and kind of tech ethics and applying that to blockchain. So thinking about how cryptocurrency is about money, and how the internet was about information, and how when the internet and information started to come out, copyright law became a really big thing, and oh boy, things like Napster and sharing MP3s widely over the internet and things like that. And so people are experiencing similar things right now with what's called securities law, which is we'll go into later. It's like how should money laws work if we're like breaking how we think about money. We'll start to apply some of these ethical frameworks to something like Libra, which is Facebook's cryptocurrency, or their proposed cryptocurrency. And honestly, who knows what will happen over the next 3 months in terms of Libra and things like that. So we'll kind of do a deep dive on trying to have an ethical mindset around that, and then we'll look at some of the intersections of blockchain and AI. And as a note with all this, when we think from an assignment perspective, so every week there's reading, and after you do the reading, then there's this forum on the internet, and a weekly assignment is to do the reading and then to post on the forum and say, hey, here's what I think about the reading, or here are my thoughts here, what are other people's thoughts? And so that happens essentially every week, except for there's also this big project that's happening over the course of the semester. So this is an individual, it can be individual or it could be in groups of 2 to 4, and this is folks from the class who you essentially get to tackle whatever interesting problem you want to tackle. So this is, it can be a wide variety of things, and the goal here is at the end to have for you all to work with some actors and people from the blockchain and cryptocurrency and policy ecosystems, and to start to kind of really wrestle with some of these problems, and to create this project over the course of time, and then at the end to have these presentations about it. So that's what that looks like. And a note on that is like, some people might do policy papers or research papers, some people might actually code some things up. We're really kind of open to what that looks like, but we think that this will be a pretty cool part of the class. Let me say one final piece here, which is there's like one paper in the class, which is after the first kind of 5 classes for people to kind of synthesize their learning, and like a short paper around that. So let me pause for a second and just check with everybody to see if anybody has questions on any of these points or the schedule that I just put up. Does anybody have any? Yeah.
So you did a series of reading groups over the summer, and I missed it. I'm really sorry about that. But it used to be called crypto ethics, and now you're calling it blockchain ethics. So why this change?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the question is, over the summer, we led this series of reading groups and we called it Crypto Ethics, and the class is called Blockchain Ethics. And we did that. We changed the title because crypto. We liked crypto ethics because it was shorter. It's like in blockchain, it has these weird connotations in the blockchain and cryptocurrency world, which is like it's kind of connected to people like. It's connected to enterprises doing these like pilots that they don't really know much about, or like the blockchain hype cycle and things like that. And so that's why we didn't want to use blockchain initially. But crypto, the issue with using crypto is that crypto also means, in addition to cryptocurrency, it means cryptography. And that world of cryptography has existed for a long time. And whenever you say, hey, we're talking about crypto ethics, and your focus is, in addition to cryptography, cryptocurrencies and blockchains, they say, no, this is wrong. And so we've had pushback essentially from various cryptographers that have said, you can't call this thing crypto ethics because that would be, it is not semantically clear what you're talking about, and we are offended by it. Yeah. So that's why we switched to blockchain ethics. Yeah.
It seems like you're confounding blockchain and cryptocurrencies. To me, they seem to be entirely different. So why does everything that you are talking about apply to blockchains in general? Because it seems to be more specific on cryptocurrency.
Yeah, good question. So, and what's your name, by the way? Do you want to say, for future questions, say your name? What's your name?
Chi.
Say it one again. Chi.
Yeah.
Okay. Chi. So, thank you for the question. The question is, most of this, we've been kind of conflating or combining cryptocurrencies and blockchains and just kind of using them. I'll often say like cryptocurrencies / blockchains, and kind of mean them as the same thing. And in fact, you're saying, hey, in fact, they have different technical affordances, and so we should think about them differently. I agree. I think that there's, and again, this is part of this touching the elephant vibe about, what we mean by these words and how we're using them. I think that, so a lot of,
So I would say
okay.
cryptocurrencies are a subset of the blockchain system.
So if I may add, I don't think this course is going to be about distributed databases. So we are not going to be talking about permissioned blockchains so much. In the permissionless world, we haven't seen a way of building a blockchain that doesn't involve some kind of token of value to provide incentives to secure the system.
So I mean, like blockchains could also mean things like a decentralized smart contracts, for example.
Usually
Those
those
are not-
have some kind of token behind them.
Not necessarily.
Like,
I mean-
do you have an example?
Like, for example, blockchains for use in the healthcare system, where like people would actually just put their data on them, and then you don't really have a value to it, but then you want to ensure that it could be, verified.
Sure. So I think that sort of falls in, for me, the distributed database category.
Yeah, and I guess for everybody else here, so the crucial question that we're getting at is when you have all these transactions in the blocks, what do those transactions represent? And is it often with something like Bitcoin or some of these other permissionless networks, the thing that exists there is this magic internet money where I'm sending Neha 1 Bitcoin. But you can also have different things represented on those transactions where you can say, hey, instead of me sending Neha 1 Bitcoin, in this transaction log, I'm actually just going to be saying, hey, I'm sending along some piece of this supply chain, like some good, like corn or something like that, or maybe you're dealing with like healthcare records or something like that. So this is to say that there are other things that you can put on these blockchains, other kinds of assets that you can put on there. And I think in general, I might not say it as strongly as Neha, but the first thing I'd say is that I think the DCI generally is kind of skeptical of these permissioned blockchain systems.
No, I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't say we're skeptical of permission blockchains. Distributed databases have existed for decades.
Yeah.
They are great. I think we're seeing a renaissance in multi-organization distributed databases, which are certainly very interesting. And it's great that people are exploring this area. I am not 100% sure, Reese, correct me if I'm wrong, if anything in this course really addresses that side of things, though.
That's a good question. So, and again, I'd say it's a spectrum though. So I think that something like Libra might
That
be
is
a
true.
good
Yeah,
example
yeah,
here.
yeah.
So Libra is a system, and generally with these systems, something like Bitcoin, anybody can be a miner in the network. Anybody can say, hey, here's some new transactions to show everybody. But something like Libra, it's a little bit more permission. So only a set of people are allowed to say, hey, here's the new transactions, here's the new things. It's not as centralized, it's just one party, but it's kind of more decentralized.
And it's a little bit strange because Libra also has its own currency. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's not even the non-currency permission database. It's a permission database with its own currency. I will say Libra, if you sort of read, and Libra is Facebook's attempt to do a digital currency, by the way. If you do read the documentation, they say in multiple places they intend to move towards a permissionless model. So they sort of describe the permissioned set of validators as a stepping stone on the way to a permissionless network.
Yeah, so I would say, but in general, we are focusing, we're not entirely, but focused more on permissionless systems. We're not focused entirely, but more focused on the kind of the money aspect side of things. But I will say, I mean, there are things, and again, this is money, but permissioned is something like, there's this financial group called the DTCC, and Neha was just there recently, and they're doing a permission system where they're trying to decrease the transaction time and friction for how they do all of this, all these weird money things for how the
Settle security.
how they
transfers.
settle security transactions. You actually know what they're doing. I have no idea. And I think that does. So I think we will touch on some of these things as we discuss some stuff like money ethics and things like that. But in general, more permissionless and more focused on money. Good question. Other questions? Expectations. Okay, cool. So, what I want to do now is, great, so we have about an hour left in class, and I think that what we want to focus on now is this kind of, this ethics piece. And so, obviously the whole course is going to be focused around ethics, and honestly similar to crypto ethics versus blockchain ethics, we thought a lot about what we should, what that second word should be. Should it be ethics? Should it be systems? What should that thing be? In general, we just stayed with the status quo, which is like tech ethics or AI ethics or blockchain ethics. And so as we explore this ethics piece, we've been working with this woman from Georgetown University who works at the ethics lab there. And it's essentially, they're very applied. So this is them thinking about how to do applied ethics, and they do this with a bunch of colleges and universities around the world. And so she's kind of worked with us around this session. And the goal of this session is to kind of understand where you're coming from at this point in time and how you're thinking about blockchain ethics, given your background. And then for us to kind of highlight what we see as some of the crucial concepts. So to kind of understand where you're at, and for us to kind of push where we're at. Together with a group. So let's get together in groups of like 3 or 4, groups of 4. So find the folks around you, combine into a group of 4. And what I want you to do is you're going to start clustering them. So you're going to say like, oh, what do I have that you also have? Oh, these things are kind of like each other, or they're super different or whatever. So you start clustering them together, and then after you've kind of clustered them, then you can start to prioritize them and say, what do we have a discussion about, like which ones you think are the most important? And then the outcome of it will be able to say, hey, when we are in a group, you say, hey, here are these 3 that we think are the most important concepts that we want to discuss as a class. So that's what you're going to do. And as you do it, I think it would be good to, once you start to cluster them, I think it's good to cluster them on a wall. So, and we have 3 walls here. So choose the wall that's close to you and start kind of putting them up there on the wall as you cluster. Okay, find a group of 3 or 4 with the folks around you. Thank you for doing that exercise. I think it's difficult because like folks have 20 plus notes and they're trying to categorize them and then prioritize 3 of them. I think it's difficult. So what I want to do now is let's just kind of go group by group and have a quick kind of 1-minute sharing for the ideas that you were discussing and the categories that you made and or why you prioritized your top 3. So like essentially saying, here are our top 3 categories that we think are most important. So let's start here.
We had kind of, it was
Do you want to say your name? By the way?
yes, my name's Keely. It was a bit hard for us to group them because they covered a pretty wide range, but some in particular that we found interesting were kind of the energy consumption aspects, and more specifically as well, government funding or subsidies towards mining operations and what that looks like. We were also interested in the different, I guess the comparisons between how this system or these new systems might be more equitable than previous systems or perhaps less equitable. And finally, thinking about kind of the right to be forgotten and how this right can be made compatible with these systems.
Oh, great. Those are awesome. Thank you for each of those. Let's go here.
So I'm Cheating and Lindsay. So we spoke about, I think, 2 big issues. One is what's the right of an individual on any cryptocurrencies? Like, do you even have the right to have privacy? Because basically, firstly, you're putting all your transaction log on the cryptocurrency chain, and secondly, like do you have the right to kind of like shroud your identity, since maybe someone would need to contact you basically for for tracing some transactions that the society do not condone, and is there a middle ground to it? And I think the second thing we spoke about is like it's the social impact, in the sense that, well, I mean, this is not really unique to blockchains or crypto systems and cryptocurrency systems, but any kind of like, basically this is money, right? And it's just fiat money. And basically if anyone can issue fiat money, then what's the role of the government. Does the government have the rights to tax this fiat money? So, I mean, the typical classic example would be, for example, if GM were to issue GM money to all their employees, and then the town GM decides to sell everything in GM money. So, from the government's perspective, the GM basically have debt equals to asset, which means that it has zero profits. Then all this flow of GM money, thus the government has the rights to tax them. And in the US, apparently they have passed a law and say that you're not allowed to do this. And that's why you do not see GM money around. And yeah, so it's the same thing over here. How do you tax this money that the government has no control over? And if you do not want to tax it, then what can you do about redistribution of, assets, for example? No taxation means that you have no money to spend and you have no money to redistribute to the poor. Is there notion of poor?
Good. Was that your second or your third vote?
And that's the second. I think we only have these two.
Oh, that's good. Cool. That's okay. Allowed. Sweet. Can we go to the back then?
My name is Denise.
Sam?
Jason?
We had in our view, we started with the context, because your use case kind of drives everything else after that. So then you get into context, then you get into governance. That's the next topic, because then once you decide what you're trying to do, then you have to set up your ground rules and figure out a way to enforce those rules. And then kind of last thing is like the physical and second order effects, basically, like what is the, things that happen outside of that, what is your impact on energy use kind of thing. That's what we had.
And could you, when you say the context piece, what do you mean by you saying starting from the context?
Well, like I said, like why you're making the blockchain. Is it money? Is it healthcare record storage? Is it just like a supply chain type system? So that's kind of what drives it.
Got it, yes, and so you're saying, what is the initial desire for the technology, and then once you're starting to create it, how do you actually govern the thing, and then once you're starting to govern it, what long-term impacts are you actually trying to create with it? Okay, cool, that makes sense. Let's go back there.
I'm Dave. We had touched on a lot of these same issues. Something I think that's also stood out for us was fitting within the subject of governance. How do you determine who gets to be the person who makes those decisions for the blockchain? Meaning, once you have several different institutions like cryptocurrencies, et cetera, that are publicly available, is it government? Is it some other entity? How do you actually get to choose who makes those decisions about what types of regulations should exist? Another thing that we mentioned, sort of in line with the taxation discussion, is I think outside of simply taxation, how do you determine how governments can enforce other financial policies that rely on monetary tools in order to get those things done, whether that's encouraging growth of the economy or implementing sanctions or sort of macro and micro scale. And there are lots of implications for that as well. And then one thing that I don't know has been brought up yet, well actually, yes, sort of fitting with the equity piece, I should say. We talked about, I think both at this current moment, access to the technology and access to those markets is somewhat limited. And who has access to those now is obviously not the same as what it will look like in the future, but there are a lot of things that are limiting, I think a large sector of the population to actually get access to those types of markets.
Yeah, if nothing else, you need a smartphone to do it, yeah. Good, those are all great. Let's go to the next group.
I'm Natalia. Do you guys want to introduce yourselves?
Ash, thank you.
So we had a lot of different ones, but our kind of top two that we looked at was grouping a lot of ours under like agency and the independence that you actually have in making decisions in terms of transactions. So like questions could be like, could you finance anti-government opposition groups? Like that would be one question. Or like self-custody versus not self-custody wallets, or when you're working in developing countries, like if you're looking to bank the unbanked and create a system that's accessible to everyone, like can you actually have people that don't need bank accounts to enter the system. And then another use case we talked about was voting on the blockchain. There are companies that exist where they're actually letting you split up your votes on blockchain. So not only would you vote on blockchain, but if you feel like a friend is more apt in like healthcare policy, like you can allocate your vote to them to vote on your behalf. So is that okay? So that's one. The second one is privacy and immutability. So like privacy of data and access to the data on the blockchain. And then specifically around like, is it ethical to have an immutable kind of system at large? And then some of the other ones we talked about were the marketing of blockchain, specifically around the hype versus utility within the cryptocurrency scene, blockchain scene, etc. And then more recently with stable coins becoming like a huge kind of like part of the system, given that like most governments are looking to stable coins. How do you decide like if it's ethical to peg a stablecoin to a certain currency? Because today it could be pegged to the dollar, and that could be helping people in Argentina or Venezuela, but tomorrow if the dollar went down, like how would you adjust for that? So how do you pick the currency that it's pegged to?
Yeah, lots of good ones there too. I think, and as a note for those who aren't aware, by stablecoin we mean that there are these cryptocurrencies that are generally pretty volatile. Something like Bitcoin goes up and down a bunch, but there are these other cryptocurrencies who are designed to be stable. So designed to be stable, and the question is with respect to what? And generally they try to be stable with respect to the US dollar. And so that is good for various reasons and bad for various reasons, and is an open question for what they should be stable about. So yeah, I think all of those are very good and juicy topics. I guess I want to highlight a couple of them here and chat about how they kind of loop back into some of the key themes of this class. I think that so there's this, the privacy, like is shrouding your identity is that okay? And this like right to be forgotten piece. I think that is there's that side of things, and on the other side is this like transparency piece where you have the privacy, and you're like, oh, who knows who sent this thing around the world, bless you. And I was able to purchase, whatever on the dark net because it was moderately private, versus on the transparency piece, and I think this is something that we'll dive into later, is there's a weird part of that, which is that because this database exists in everybody's computer around the world, you don't actually have very much privacy. You have what's called pseudonymity, which is where instead of saying like Reese gave Neha this amount of money, instead it says 0xAB7 gave 0x2b5 or whatever this amount of money. And so you don't really know who those are at the beginning, but if you essentially just use some techniques, you can be like, oh, that's definitely Reese because it came from his computer or the IP address or whatever. And so that balance here, the privacy versus transparency piece is a big one. That's a big tension. I think that the other big one that you all are getting at was the immutability of the system, and it's kind of connected, to the privacy piece, but there's, if you have a system where the code is, people talk about it as unstoppable code, and what they mean by that is that if you say, okay, I'm going to send, it's kind of what Neha was talking about with the censorship resistant money, if I send people this money, then it's going to get there. The computers will do their thing and it will happen. Or with these things called smart contracts, which we'll deal with later, it's just like an if-then statement. So you say, if something happens, then send the money. So it's these autonomous, unstoppable things, and that versus how you actually govern them. And so if you have something that's just like unstoppable versus like, oh no, we actually want it to not be permissionless, we want to actually govern this thing. So that's kind of another big tension, unstoppability. Versus governance. Can people read my handwriting okay? Okay, I will get better. Unstoppability, sometimes people say permissionlessness, which is way too many S's, or trustlessness, which is way too many S's. The other one that I was going to say here was, all of these, the equity and access piece versus the kind of money and hype piece, I think is a crucial one, and this is one that people talk about how philosophers have been talking about this for decades, centuries, millennia, which is the balance between liberty versus equality. Where it's like, hey, if you just let everybody do what they want, then it's like, oh, sweet, that's awesome, like we love liberty. But then like, oh, maybe if you have this like hyper-libertarian system, it doesn't actually create the like equal or equitable outcomes that you want. So that piece is a crucial issue: versus liberty/freedom versus like equality or equity. Let's call it equity. And that's especially true in the cryptocurrency world because so many of the people in the cryptocurrency space, and we'll talk about this in a sec, are very libertarian by nature. So they're much more of the liberty side. The other thing that I guess I want to say here is a lot of these are connected to, you have the, you all in the back are talking about the macro policy, where it's like, okay, if you, nation states can have monetary policies, which are cool and they allow them to do things in times of need or in a certain context. It's something that people are worried about with something like Libra, which is this non-nation state money. If it's being used and its goal is to be used in a bunch of developing countries around the world, and those countries start to use Libra, then who has power over that country's monetary policy? Well, it used to be the country, and now that country can't, doesn't have power to say, oh, let's print more money now, or let's print less money now. And instead it's just like, whatever Libra does, whatever Zuck decides to do, we have to do it. So that is an issue, and I'm gonna write that one as, how did I get this? I would call that as part of this, like, what I would call like institutional, this is like the institutional ethics or the institutional co-evolution.
But what if it's decentralized in the first place? Like, if everyone just uses Bitcoin and the government doesn't have any power.
That's the dream of
So
it.
that's not even,
Not me personally, but many people. Yeah.
yeah, but that's not even about institutional, right? Because no one controls it.
Yeah, and I agree with that. I think that or I guess what I was trying to say here was that there's or no matter what, I think it is important to view these things as institutions, because something like Bitcoin, technically no one controls it, but in fact, you have this group of folks that are developers, and the developers are writing the code, they're updating the code. You have the miners who are actually running some of this mining equipment and can choose whether to mine on this chain or that chain. You have these exchanges that deal with how to convert your fiat money into cryptocurrency money, and you have the kind of users of it as well. And so there is, and we'll talk about this more, but there are these weird governance processes that these people take in this new open source ecosystem world that make them look kind of like institutions based on how the people are governing the system. So, and let me take one final piece on that, which is this institutional co-evolution. I think a balance here is what people call like evolution versus revolution, and that is the desire of many people in the cryptocurrency world to create like some kind of revolution and exit the existing system and create a new system versus the same old one. So, co-evolution versus revolution. So, let me see if there's any other crucial ones here. Yeah, I think that's mainly what I want to say. Let me scroll down here to talk about some of these other ones that I think most of these showed up, but yeah, these tensions and trade-offs. And the nice thing with all this stuff is that there are no right answers here, or kind of a nice thing, but also not a nice thing. This privacy versus security trade-off, which we'll talk a lot about in class 3, and or privacy versus transparency. That's kind of a very similar one. The liberty versus equality one we chatted about. The evolution versus revolution one we chatted about. The freedom versus consent one we talked about. The trustlessness versus governance of like, do whatever you want versus like, we should decide. And at the root is, I think, kind of what you're getting at, which is this this centralization versus decentralization piece. How centralized should these systems be, or how decentralized should they be? And then how does the governance work once they are like that? So let me just say 2 other quick notes, or 3 other quick notes here, which are, so if these are some of the crucial kind of tensions and trade-offs that we're going to be dealing with in class, I think that there are, as we're talking about them, just a reminder for folks to as they're speaking, to make sure that they're differentiating between is and ought statements. And what I mean by this is, as an example here, let's say that the sky is blue, that is an is statement, sky is blue, versus the sky ought to be blue. And that's like my own opinion about whether I like the sky to be blue or green or whatever. And these kinds of statements are crucial as we're discussing things, because we're going to be talking a lot about what these systems do. It's just like, oh, the system's doing this, or the system is doing that, like it's going to impact things in this way, versus is that actually good or bad? And so making sure as we're discussing these things, saying, okay, let's look at the income inequality, look at the data that we have of these systems, make a bunch of is statements about, like, true statements about what we see the system being, and then later determine, oh, is that good or bad? So that's this is versus ought difference. There's also this circle of concern difference. So this is thinking about, who are we, when we're thinking about the impacts of people in these systems, are you thinking about the producers of it? Are we thinking about the developers or the venture capitalists or whatever who are producing things, or are we thinking about the consumers of these systems? So someone like the unbanked folks. And so differentiating between the creators of the system versus the kind of consumers is a crucial one. And this other one that is especially true within the blockchain and cryptocurrency world is the local versus global. So are you thinking about, as an example here, the global piece often comes up with like, oh, should the monetary policy of developing countries, how is that affected by Libra being a global nation state private currency? But we'll also be dealing with a lot of local issues as well, which are things like, how are, within the United States, like how diverse and inclusive are the systems that these people are building? Is it traditional tech? Is it traditional finance, or is it different? So that's another one, is thinking about the circles of concern. And then the final piece that I want to say here is, when we think about the mechanisms for change, or how these systems are running, you can think of this thing from Lawrence Lessig called the pathetic dot. And what that is it is I guess in the late 90s, he wrote a book about, this was in the context of the Creative Commons and thinking about copyright on the internet. And he was saying, if you want to make change, or if you're a person on the internet, here's the forces that are acting on you. They can be like the code itself. So this is what he means by architecture, it's the actual code itself. And so in these systems, it's like sometimes you put the code in and then the code has impacts. That's one way to think about it. The or is what you're thinking about, like the market. So it's like, what are the incentives of the system? And so we'll deal with this a lot as well, where it's like, oh, if people are incentivized to make Bitcoin money by turning their electricity into Bitcoin, well, then you're going to get a bunch of people doing that around the world, and that may be bad for the environment. So that's kind of the market piece. On the law side, this is usually when you're trying to contain the market or the code, and you're like, okay, we want to have a positive outcome here. Let's regulate this thing. Let's make some policy. Let's do something to, so I guess in this example, it's like various countries around the world have banned cryptocurrencies because they want them, they could have made them more expensive to use, but they instead decided to ban them. So that's another piece here. And then the final one, which is a little bit more, I guess difficult to understand, which are norms, which are how are people socially thinking about this? And this will come up a lot within these governance conversations, where you think about the communities of people who are governing these systems, and what are their values? How, what are their norms? What kinds of ways do they talk with each other? How do they communicate? And if you can kind of shape those norms, then you can shape these systems. So this is to say that this is a final concept that we'll deal with a lot, which is the mechanism, essentially, that these systems are operating on, and the mechanisms for changing them usually fall in these 4 buckets, essentially. So let me pause for a second and ask, just to check in with folks, are there any questions around either some of these big tensions and trade-offs, or other comments on things that people said today for the crucial concepts in this class? Yeah, you looked like you were going to raise your hand the entire time, so you did, yeah.
I found the framework of looking at outcome harms versus process harms versus structural harms very useful in terms of ethical frameworks. And sometimes important to differentiate.
Yeah.
So that's like utilitarian, did it hurt people versus more like Kantian, was this fair, did it violate your autonomy, versus like statistical structural things, was this equitable between these various groups, do people served in this are also the people benefiting?
Yeah, I love that a lot. And there's a so what was your name one more time?
Jason?
Jason, thank you, Jason. So yeah, I think that there's what Jason's getting at is this crucial in the philosophy world when people are there's one part of philosophy called normative ethics, and normative ethics is the group of folks who are saying what is good or what is bad in the world. It's like the ought part there. It's like what ought to be true. And when people think about that, they usually kind of break it into these big three categories. One of which is the outcome. So this is utilitarianism or consequentialism is what it's called. It's like what will be the impact of the system. And if the impact is, if a lot of people like were harmed or a lot of people became happy, then it's either good or bad. That is different than thinking about kind of the process of the system, or like what, were you, instead of thinking about the outcome, you think about what is you call process harms, or what people call like virtue ethics sometimes, which is like, or deontology, which is how you are, instead of thinking about the outcomes, you're thinking about were you doing something that was, were you being dutiful? Were you abiding by laws? Were you abiding by some moral norms? That kind of piece. And then the third one, tell me what you mean by the structural harms. Yeah.
So this is more theory of justice versus individual focused things. So this would be like across different groups that you care about, do they have equal access, or are they benefiting equally from this? Or if you're doing some sort of experiment that harms people for the sake of everyone generally, are you making sure that the people who are benefiting are also the people who are paying prices, whether it's expense or something else?
Yeah, great. I think that makes sense. Yeah, which is how, the theory of justice and thinking from a distributive justice perspective, how are the costs and benefits divided among society versus my own individual things where it's like, I did a good job here because I was honest. Whereas like, from a structural perspective, here are the cost benefits for everybody in the system. Good, I think it's like, yeah.
So like if you had intent for something, is intent under process technically because it's virtue?
I think so. I would claim it is, which is like, my intent was good, I was honest, and my honesty, unfortunately, like, hurt lots of people, but at least I was honest. So if you were a virtue ethicist or whatever, you'd say, good job, Reese, you were honest. But if you were a consequentialist or utilitarian, you'd say, ooh, bad job, Reese, because you hurt lots of people. Good question. Any other thoughts or questions on this ethics? Okay, cool. So we have about 17 minutes left, and what I want to do now, well, so a note here is as we go through the rest of the class, these kinds of, whether it's the difference between the processes versus the outcomes, or it's some of these key concepts that we're thinking about here, differentiating between is and ought, all those things will come up throughout the class, and we'll be kind of using those terms as we discuss all of the impacts of blockchain technology. So what I want to do now is do a really quick run through of this history of cypherpunks, and the goal here is because part of the main goal here is to kind of get you all to understand some of the initial upbringings, essentially the childhood of Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies, in order to understand how it might go forward in the future. So let's kind of dive into that, and then we will wrap up at the end. So the first note here is that cryptography, and by cryptography we mean like the study of secrets and how people keep secrets from each other, especially like messages and things like that. It's been around for a long time. And back in the day, they were kind of simple. There was like substitution where it's like I'm going to change all my R's to A's and now no one will be able to know what I say. And now it is more complicated over time. There was a crucial moment in 1939 in World War II where cryptography played a really big role. This Enigma cipher, which was something that the German government was using, it was broken by British intelligence, and it allowed the British to understand what the Germans were saying. And so people have been battling with encryption and cryptography for a long time. There was a crucial moment, though, in 1977 with what's called a non-reversible function, or this thing RSA. And RSA just stands for the people who invented this thing, one of which is Ron Rivest, who is an advisor of the DCI and here at MIT. I don't know what the S or the A stand for, but
Shamir and Adel. I forgot.
the A's the last one, Ron got it good because he was the first. So this non-reversible function, the difference with it is like all of these, it's like if you find out how it works, you can kind of, you can break it. And in order to, at the beginning, you have to kind of meet with the person beforehand and say, hey, by the way, this is how the encryption, or this is how the scheme works. And you can like chat about it beforehand. You're like, okay, cool. And then you can go out and do things. This non-reversible function was different because it allowed people to essentially, I don't know the best way to differentiate. It allowed people to create, to encrypt data in a way that not even a nation-state government. So if I can go and I can encrypt my data, and then even the nation-state government with all of its tools and abilities and stuff, they would have to have computers running for years and years and years in order to kind of break this encryption. So they can't get in there. Only I, who have, and we'll talk about this more next time, the private key to this idea, or to this encryption, only I can open it up. And that was a big issue. Because then the government was like, oh, you all can encrypt messages in a way that doesn't allow us to see them. That we don't like that. That would, for both legitimate reasons, some of these public good reasons, like, oh, the terrorist financing or things like that. It's like, we want to know what this is. And, partially bad reasons, the government wanting to surveil and things like that. And so this non-reversible function, once it happened, it was a big deal, and so there was this group of people on this mailing list, which is really funny that it was on just a random mailing list on the internet in the late 80s, early 90s, and this mailing list was called the Cypherpunks mailing list. And as these encryption things started, you're good.
It's a good podcast.
That is
That is great.
as this thing started, the state was obviously not happy with it, and so there's this battle between these cypherpunks and the state. And some cool examples of this is in the early 90s, the US government, they considered cryptography a munition, kind of like big guns or bombs and things like that. They're like, hey, this thing is we consider this a munition for export. So if you send it outside the country, you have committed a federal crime. And this thing called PGP, Pretty Good Privacy, the source code of it, the government was like, this is bad, we're going to put you in jail, the creator. And their response was to publish the source code of it as a book. So they just take all the source code and turn it into a book and said that code is free speech. And as a result, essentially, that was the first code as free speech thing. And the government, that went through the courts, and it was like, okay, code is free speech. So that was happening in the early 90s, which is kind of crazy. Another thing that was happening was this guy, Adam Back, who is part of the blockchain and Bitcoin world today, he wrote a version of this RSA, this cryptography algorithm, in 3 lines, and then suggested people use it as email signature files. So this was him saying hey, all this thing is technically a munition, you get in huge trouble for this thing, add it to the bottom of your email, and have it be show that kind of as a activist,
Stick it to the man.
Stick it to the man vibe, exactly. So that was that code. You can printed it on T-shirts, and people were wearing it on T-shirts and stuff. This person, Vince K, put up a web page that allowed anybody to become an international arms trafficker by adding this bit of code to your website. So this was the people, the cypherpunks, fighting against the state in this way.
To be clear, the government literally outlawed certain forms of cryptography, which is just an algorithm. It's software. It's what's now considered free speech. So I wasn't sure if you actually said that. So by writing those 3 lines of code, people were just by sticking that in their email signature, they were exporting what was classified by the government as a weapon, as a military grade weapon.
Yeah, it was intense. Or I wasn't there, but I'd assume it was intense. There were some other battles that they were doing, like there's a thing called the Clipper chip, which was this little chip, this little code thing that they wanted, that the NSA created, that said, hey people, you can use this to do encrypted messaging. But in fact, the NSA had put a backdoor in it so that they could access it, even though other people couldn't. And obviously the cypherpunks were not happy with it, and they ended up breaking the system and finding ways to attack it and things like that. So that was a big win for the cypherpunks. They broke it in 1994 and it was defunct by 1996. And as a note with all this stuff, you can see this battle of these individuals versus the state. And there's a reading for today about the crypto, I think this is from the Crypto Anarchist Manifesto, there's a Crypto Anarchist Manifesto and then the Cypherpunk Manifesto, and they were written in 1992 and 1993. And one line from it is pretty aggressive, which is, just as the technology of printing, excuse me, just as the technology of printing altered and reduced the power of medieval guilds in the social power structure, so too will cryptologic methods fundamentally alter the nature of corporations and government interference in economic transactions. So this, obviously the printing press was a massive big deal, and this person was saying, hey, cryptography is going to be a similarly big deal in its way to fundamentally alter the relationship between the individual and the state. So this group was fighting versus the state at the beginning, and you can see, and you can see over time, here are some of the parts of this group and how it progressed over time. We don't need to go too deep into this, and I'll share all these slides, but a lot of these things were being posted and were being learned about from an academic perspective, and then over time, people were experimenting with new systems before Bitcoin. So parts of Bitcoin were already being created, like proof of work as an idea, which we'll talk about again soon, was created before Bitcoin actually was implemented as a system. And there were other kinds of e-gold or cybercash or digicash. These were other attempts at electronic currency before Bitcoin that failed for a variety of reasons. But they were trying these things on the cypherpunk mailing list before Bitcoin actually succeeded. And just as a note here, the folks, when you think about the cypherpunk mailing list, you had these 3 people who were the initial founders, and then a lot of them ended up being big parts of the Bitcoin and cryptocurrency ecosystem. So Adam Back was part of this list and is now one of the founders of the main Bitcoin companies. Bram Cohen was part of it. He's the creator of BitTorrent, and he now has his cryptocurrency company. Hal Finney has passed away, but he was part of this stuff. Nick Szabo, this guy Zuko, who was part of this list back in the day and created Zcash, which was one of the main cryptocurrencies. So a bunch of these folks were on this initial cypherpunk mailing list, kind of being, you could call it polarized or extremized, but also kind of just trying to fight against the state. And then a bunch of other people were on this list too, like the WikiLeaks founder and things like that. So this was kind of an intense list back in the day. And I think that the crucial thing that I want to actually let's say this as well. So this crypto anarchist group, you can, in the cypherpunk group, you can kind of imagine them as, so there's this, another one of the readings for today was this guy Arvind Narayanan, a professor at Princeton, and he's with this article, What Happened to the Crypto Dream, and he talks about, he kind of differentiates the different kinds of cryptography, and the part that we were talking about just now was this cypherpunk crypto piece, which are these, this vision of crypto that fundamentally and inexorably reshapes social, economic, and political power structures. That's what people thought was going to happen, and to some extent may still happen. And that's different than some of the pragmatic crypto side, which is what some of you are getting at, which is hey, what about these, this cryptography that we can use in these systems to maintain pre-digital privacy levels? So that's what Neha was talking about earlier, when it's like cash is nice in some ways because it's like it's anonymous. I can give anybody cash, like the government doesn't know about it, and neither does Facebook. And so pragmatic crypto is this idea that you're like, hey, we want to just maintain the status quo of having some amount of anonymity and privacy, even as everything turns digital and these institutions kind of control it. So that is the way to think about cypherpunk crypto. It's kind of like the more aggressive side of this crypto for privacy bucket. And then in addition, let me just say one final piece, which is there's the privacy piece, which is the by nature, privacy is kind of an asymmetric idea that you have, like I have privacy and you can't see my things. And that's different than what people call crypto for security, which is essentially something like all the e-commerce that we do online, that is enabled by crypto for security. It says, hey, I can just put in my credit card online and send it to these people. No one can look at it in between, and then Amazon can check it out and it should be like, okay, I'm going to type your, your credit card information to buy this thing from Amazon. So that has been super successful. Obviously, e-commerce is a massive thing, but the crypto for privacy piece has been less successful, primarily because of its this asymmetric kind of political power and goal piece. So to conclude, I just want to say that there's this, it would be good to look at pictures of this, but there are the crypto anarchist and cypherpunk mailing list. That culture still exists to some extent within the blockchain and cryptocurrency worlds today. I know, like Neha and I know a lot of friends who are very, very, very private with their information. They don't share it with anybody. They don't have cell phones, things like that. You have a bunch of these like super libertarian folks who like want to make islands that are their own nation states, or like eat a lot of meat. There's a whole world of these people that love eating meat. So that world exists, and to some extent also the kind of pushback against that world, which is this other cryptocurrency called Ethereum, which they, instead of being kind of, if the Bitcoiners are kind of like intense, really security focused, always thinking in this paranoid mindset, like against the nation state, cypherpunk style, the Ethereum is all about, they wear clothes with unicorns on them and always have like many, many colors and things like that. And so you can kind of see the result of this initial childhood of the cryptocurrency world still manifests today, and it still impacts and will impact a lot of the conversations that we have going forward. So with that, are there any questions on questions or comments on crypto anarchy or the cypherpunk mailing list or anything like that? Yeah.
So how has this evolved into like the federated platforms world and things like that? Because I feel like that's kind of the contemporary vision of a lot of this.
Yeah, good question. So your question, remind me one more time. Jason. So Jason's question is, how has the crypto anarchist and cypherpunk world evolved into the federated platforms? And what he means by federated platforms is there's kind of like Bitcoin as a platform, or Ethereum as this new platform, this new currency, and then there's this world of kind of a bunch of kind of what you were talking about before, all these new kinds of blockchain experiments, and many of them might look more like just distributed databases, or they might look less kind of aggressively anti-censorship resistant as things like this. I would say it primarily comes as as kind of a touch point and kind of a tension point between these communities, where someone like, if a bunch of the Bitcoin folks, they go to this big conference, and at that conference you have a bunch of people in suits, and they don't like that. And the suit people don't like that the Bitcoin people are like, like wearing normal clothes or whatever. So I think, no offense to people in suits. I have a nice suit. Some of my best friends wear suits. So I think that's primarily, it just is a tension between these two worlds and how they think about how this technology should be used.